My name is Dana Ripper. I'm here with Ethan Duke. We are of the Missouri River Bird Observatory, and our mission is conservation via science, education, and advocacy. And so we put together this webinar series in hopes of informing and inspiring folks to take action for conservation. So with us tonight is my friend and colleague from Beyond Plastic Speakers Bureau, Rebekah Creshkoff. And Rebekah is coming to us from New York State. And I'll let her introduce herself and go right ahead.
Thank you, Dana. And I must say, it's humbling to see so many people here tonight, including so many friends. So thank you for coming out. I'm here today on behalf of Beyond Plastics, a scrappy little nonprofit that educates, advocates, and organizes with the audacious goal of ending plastic pollution everywhere. A couple of years ago, I learned that Judith Enck, a former regional EPA administrator, was giving an online course called Beyond Plastic Pollution, and I signed up. It was a real eye-opener. And it was a lot of information, more than I could retain. I wanted to be able to discuss the issue intelligently with people, so I signed up for their Speakers Bureau training, which is how I came to be here today to talk about the problems. Oops, that was the class. You'll see it again later. The problems with plastics. It's worse than you think. Because I can practically guarantee you that whatever you already know about the downsides of plastic, there's still worse stuff out there. But first, let me introduce myself. My name is Rebekah Creshkoff, and I'm a recovering corporate apologist. I served time, 30 years to be precise, working for a Fortune 500 company, of which you have heard. Here I am with the big boss, Jamie Dimon. My job was to make employees love him, and I was good at it. It didn't hurt that he's charismatic and good looking. For the record, this photo was taken more than 10 years ago, and I've had zero contact with him since. Now here's an even older picture of me with another charismatic and good looking guy, my husband, Lenny. He teased me mercilessly about working for the propaganda department, but he respected my extracurricular activities. I was relatively new to birding, but when I became aware of the issue of birds striking windows, I was concerned. There's a lot of plate glass in New York City, and a lot more now. So I started checking around the base of buildings early in the mornings on my way to work. This is a male yellow-bellied sapsucker. Other volunteers joined me, and now Project Safe Flight is one of New York City Audubon's signature programs. It also attracted media attention. I got my 15 minutes of fame when I was featured in the New Yorker's The Talk of the Town. Lenny is proud of me for starting Project Safe Flight. So it was kind of a gut punch one night after our Chinese takeout dinner when he casually remarked, "Just think, your longest lasting legacy will be all the plastic you've used over the course of your lifetime." Ouch. He didn't mean me personally, of course. He meant all of us. And given the longevity of plastic, he was absolutely right. It's so durable, in fact, that most of the plastic ever made, over 8 billion tons, is still with us today. Just how much plastic is that? 8 billion tons, or 8 gigatons, is equivalent to more than 100 moons. It's actually 114 moons, and that's what's up there. Or, for another frame of reference, 8 billion tons is twice the weight of all animals alive today, from insects through mammals, including humans and our livestock. And researchers estimate 11 billion tons of plastic will have accumulated in the environment by next year. You could say we're living in the Plasticine epoch. The Plasticine started around 1950, when plastics began to be mass produced. And of those 8 billion tons of plastic, more than half has been made in just the last 20 years. The good news is that means we can do something about it. But first, how did we get here? In 1907, the first entirely synthetic material, Bakelite, was invented by Belgian-born chemist and entrepreneur Leo Baekeland. Time magazine named him the father of plastic in 1940. Yeah, I just suddenly realized if I'm seeing this, you can too. You probably don't want to. Okay, but the plastics industry really came of age during World War II. With raw materials in short supply, manufacturers turned to synthetics. Lenny is a World War II buff, but for those of you who aren't, this is a photo of the Normandy landings on D-Day. Nylon replaced silk and parachutes. Acrylic, better known as plexiglass, made optically perfect cockpit windows and enclosures for gunners. And I'm sorry about the swastikas, folks. They represent the number of German fighter planes this bomber shot down. Polyethylene was a military secret. It was used to insulate cables like the big fat ones you see here, which made the newly developed technology of radar possible. Some say radar is what won the war. PVC film, think cling wrap, was used to protect entire airplanes from corrosion during transatlantic shipping. Synthetics were deployed in supplies issues to the troops. US plastic production increased by 300% during the war. But manufacturers knew that once it was over, they'd have to find peacetime markets. So they touted the wonders of their new synthetic materials to consumers on the home front. But plastic had a bad rap among civilians. It smelled strange, couldn't be repaired when it broke, and melted when heated. So the industry launched an aggressive marketing campaign, becoming one of Madison Avenue's biggest clients. Soon, plastics were as American as apple pie. Those of us born after World War II have lived our entire lives surrounded by plastic, which makes it difficult for us to even register. Like a fish in water, we can't even see it because it constitutes the very medium in which we live. Plastic undergirds every aspect of modern life. Those 8, soon to be 11 billion tons of plastic are hiding in plain sight. Some of it is obvious. Some of it is less so. Take a look at these items. All of them have plastic in them. Might blow your mind to realize that. And some of it is entirely hidden until it's not. 370 miles east of the Australian mainland, the Lord Howe Island Group has been listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in recognition of its beauty and biodiversity. It's also home to some of the most plastic-contaminated birds in the world, including the flesh-footed shearwater. Researchers working on the island recently coined the term plasticosis to describe the irreversible scarring of their digestive tract by shards of plastic. And it's not just the physical shape of plastic fragments that harms living things. That's because most plastics is made from polymers derived from fossil fuels combined with synthetic chemical additives. On their own, polymers are just a goopy mess, so it takes a lot of additives to make plastic useful. Any given plastic item is about 50-50 polymers and chemicals. The polymer half forms a backbone made up of carbon-carbon bonds, which are very strong and stable. These bonds are what makes plastic so durable. But the chemical additives are not actually attached at a molecular level. They just sit between the folds. Since they aren't tightly bound to the material, they don't stay put. That means plastic is not inert. If there's one thing you should take away from this talk, it should be that plastic is not inert. More than 13,000 different chemicals are associated with plastic and plastic production. Over a quarter of them have properties that are of concern to scientists. Many are endocrine disruptors. The endocrine system is a network of glands that create and release hormones which travel around our bodies via our bloodstream, conveying instructions to specific cells. There are more than 200 hormones. Estrogen, testosterone, melatonin, and insulin are some of the more familiar ones. This network regulates all bodily functions from conception through adulthood and into old age. If your endocrine system doesn't function properly, neither does your body. Just think about diabetics and insulin. Among the endocrine disrupting chemicals added to plastics are bisphenols, which makes plastics hard, phthalates, which makes them flexible, and brominated flame retardants, which keep them from catching fire. Plastics are highly flammable. Infinitesimally small quantities of these compounds, on the order of a drop in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, can hack and scramble the body's messaging system. Endocrine disruptors have been linked through multiple lines of evidence to a host of health problems that are on the rise, including obesity, diabetes and cardiovascular disease, certain cancers, reproductive disorders, including infertility, neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD, lower IQ and autism, asthma, thyroid disease, and impaired immune function. Earlier this month, a paper came out that looked at the disease burden and costs attributable to the chemicals used in plastics. Researchers estimated that in 2018, endocrine disrupting chemicals resulted in $250 billion in healthcare costs in the United States. You may have seen this article in the current issue of Consumer Reports. They found endocrine disruptors, particularly phthalates, in virtually every food they tested. As we saw, these chemicals are deliberately added to plastics, like food packaging, to give them their various attributes. But plastics are also a source of chemicals that are not intentionally added. Some chemicals fall in both categories. For example, PFAS. PFAS, or per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a class of more than 15,000 man-made compounds that repel water and can withstand high heat. These properties are why they're so widely used in common consumer products, everything from non-stick cookware, takeout containers, cosmetics and personal care products, to raincoats, electronics, carpeting, and firefighting foam. Those same properties are also what makes them take a long time to break down, which is why they're called forever chemicals. Like other endocrine disruptors, they've been linked to a range of adverse health outcomes. And while they are deliberately added to things like waterproof clothing and takeout containers, researchers are finding them in more and more products, like toilet paper, because manufacturers use PFAS on their machinery as a lubricant. Similarly, all plastics are contaminated with flame retardants, which are applied to the machinery so the plastic doesn't catch fire. And then there are the chemicals that form as plastic is used over time. In a study released in February 2022, Danish scientists put tap water into typical sports water bottles, some old, some brand new, and let it sit at room temperature for 24 hours. They were surprised by what they found. More than 400 chemicals, many toxic, had migrated from the plastic into the water. After going through a dishwasher, the bottles leached over 3,500 chemicals, a large portion of which were unknown substances. One compound the researchers did recognize was DEET, the active ingredient in many insect repellents. Meanwhile, no chemicals migrated into water put into glass bottles as a control. Between the chemicals that are deliberately added to plastics to give them their various properties, those that attach to products during the manufacturing process, and those that form over the time, every day we are exposed to thousands of chemicals that are found nowhere in nature. We absorb these chemicals from the food we eat, the beverages we drink, and the clothes we wear. Some of them are harmful and some of them aren't. And for many of them, we just don't know. We don't even know what they all are because our lax regulatory system doesn't require companies to tell us. If scientists were to conduct a study that deliberately exposed humans to a host of different chemicals, including known toxins, it would be considered unethical in the extreme. Yet that's what happening to all of us every day of our lives, starting even before we are born. We spend our entire lives bathing in a sea of synthetic chemicals. We have been poisoning ourselves and the planet through our use of plastic, the entire planet. And if current trends continue, it's only going to get worse. The reason has to do with the other main ingredient in plastics, fossil fuels. These days in the United States, plastic polymers are mostly made from a byproduct of fracked gas. I probably don't need to tell anyone here about fracking, but you may not know that there's dry gas and wet gas. Dry gas comes out of the ground virtually ready for market, but wet gas contains other liquid compounds that need to be separated out first. One of these is ethane, which used to be just flared off. Nowadays, that ethane is captured and sent by pipelines to an ethane cracker facility. Cracking is the term for the process of breaking molecular bonds in complex hydrocarbons to create simpler ones. Because the carbon-carbon bond is so strong, the process requires extremely high temperatures. Ethane cracks around 1650 degrees Fahrenheit, creating ethylene, the basic building block of most plastics. Add pressure and a catalyst, and you get polyethylene, which is extruded and cut into little pellets. These polyethylene pellets are the feedstock for most plastics made today, everything from auto parts to zippers. Ethane crackers are extremely complex. They are among the largest, most expensive, and most energy-intensive facilities in the process and manufacturing sector. This new Shell Polymers cracker facility in Western Pennsylvania received nearly $1.7 billion in subsidies. The complex covers nearly 400 acres along the Ohio River, 30 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. It's fed by pipelines stretching hundreds of miles across Appalachia and has its own rail system. At its heart is an ethane cracker with 7 furnaces, 200 vessels, and 95 miles of pipe. 3 other units on the site process the cracked ethane into polyethylene pellets. But new crackers aren't coming just to Western Pennsylvania. This map shows new petrochemical and plastics infrastructure projects or expansions approved or announced since 2012. At least 90 such proposals have been advanced over the last decade, including 42 major construction projects. So why is the fossil fuel industry betting so heavily on plastics? The increasing popularity of electric cars and renewable energy means they're losing market share in the transportation and energy sectors. According to the International Energy Agency, renewables are set to overtake coal to become the world's largest source of electricity by early next year. To hedge their bets, the fossil fuel industry is ramping up plastic production. This is their plan B. But plastic is not carbon neutral. If plastic were a country, it'd be the world's 5th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Cracking alone requires huge amounts of power. The new Shell cracker has a permit that allows them to release as much CO2 annually as 480,000 cars. The expansion planned by the industry could account for 15% of US greenhouse gas emissions, causing us to miss our Paris goals of cutting emissions in half by 2030. If all those new crackers go into operation, we may not be able to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, because big corporations don't just walk away from multi-billion-dollar investments. They don't want to wind up with stranded assets. Their business model commits them to making and selling ever more plastic. But this is nothing new. Remember how, after World War II, the plastics industry became one of Madison Avenue's biggest clients? The ad men succeeded so well that by the mid-1950s, the industry looked to grow not by moving plastic into people's homes, but through them. This issue of Life magazine celebrating throwaway living came out in 1955. All those items were made of or incorporated plastic. The following year, at a conference of the Society of the Plastics Industry, the editor of Modern Packaging magazine said it was time to concentrate on single-use packaging, which represented, quote, not a one-shot market for a few thousand units, but an everyday recurring market measured by the billions of units. The future of plastics, he said, is in the trash can. His boss gave him some heat for that remark. He explained when he spoke to the trade group once again 7 years later. You are filling the trash cans, the rubbish dumps, and the incinerators with literally billions of plastics bottles, plastics jugs, plastics tubes, blisters and skin packs, plastics bags and films and sheet packages, and now even plastics cans, he enthused. The happy day has arrived when nobody any longer considers the plastics package too good to throw away. Here's an ad from that era. You won't be surprised to learn that this guy was inducted into the Packaging and Processing Hall of Fame. So the disposable phenomenon is nothing new, but it's been accelerating almost exponentially. And it really took off in 2005 when the Energy Policy Act exempted fracking from Safe Water Drinking Act regulations, making oil and gas the only industry that is allowed to inject known hazardous materials directly into or adjacent to underground drinking water supplies. This is known as the Halliburton loophole, and it set off a boom in hydrofracking, leading to a glut of cheap fracked gas, as well as its cheap byproduct, ethane. So the industry keeps on making more and more plastic and convincing producers and retailers of fast-moving consumer goods to wrap more and more things in it. As consumers, we cannot escape plastic, and the industry knows that plenty of us feel guilty about it. That's why they've engaged in an aggressive, decades-long campaign to convince us that plastics recycling works. According to a joint investigation by NPR and Frontline, the industry persuaded the public that most plastic could and would be recycled, even though they knew otherwise. As an insider wrote back in 1974, there is serious doubt that recycling plastic can ever be made viable on an economic basis. As this cynical quote suggests, the industry viewed recycling as a way to shore up their markets. So they spent millions telling people to recycle because selling recycling sold plastic. The tactic worked. The industry has duped us into being willing partners in keeping plastic moving through our homes. Here's a storyboard for a 1990 commercial from DuPont. A plastic bottle, empty but filled with potential, refuses to stay in a garbage truck and ultimately flies to DuPont, which has, quote, pioneered the country's largest, most comprehensive plastic recycling program to help plastic fill valuable uses and roles. Historical tangent here. The iconic recycling symbol was created in 1970 by a 23-year-old architecture student, Gary Anderson, for a design competition held by a cardboard box manufacturer. 18 years later, the Society of the Plastics Industry, remember them, appropriated the 3 chasing arrows for their resin identification system. It was an ingenious marketing move because it suggested that any item with the symbol could be recycled. Most of us remain convinced these symbols mean an item is recyclable. And if you're like me a couple of years ago, you put just about anything made of plastic into the recycling bin, hoping it'll get recycled. Wrong. No matter what your community or waste hauler tells you, only number 1 PET bottles and number 2 HDPE bottles and jugs, and possibly number 5 polypropylene containers have a realistic chance of getting recycled. That's because they're the only types of post-consumer plastic for which there are markets. And even number 1 and number 2 plastics generally aren't recycled into new bottles and jugs. Instead, they are largely, quote, downcycled into carpeting and fleece fabric. Now, that might sound like a higher and better use, but it does nothing to prevent more single-use plastic bottles from being produced. And it enables the petrochemical industry to keep more single-use plastic bottles moving through our homes. And of course, someday those carpets and fleece pullovers will have to be disposed of too. Recycling just delays final disposal. It doesn't avoid it. As for plastics number 3 through 7, it's more cost-effective for producers to buy virgin plastic because polyethylene pellets are much cheaper than recycled plastic. No one's going to use recycled plastic if they're losing money on it. And in truth, you actually might not want them to, because it turns out that items made of recycled plastic release even more toxic chemicals than those made from virgin plastic. So what's actually happening with all our other plastic, numbers 3 through 7? Typically, these plastics wind up getting burned, generally in a waste-to-energy facility if there's one close by, or a cement kiln. Again, this might sound like a good thing. Hey, at least they're getting energy out of it. But it's actually bad, because incinerators and cement kilns release toxic emissions and greenhouse gases and create lots of extremely hazardous ash too. And the people in neighboring communities bear the brunt of those hazardous emissions. Nearly 4.5 million people in the United States live within 3 miles of an incinerator, 85% of which are located in environmental justice communities. That's the dark red dots on the map. The sad truth is plastics recycling has been an abysmal failure. In the US, our annual recycling rate for post-consumer plastic waste has never hit double digits. In 2021, it was less than 6%. That's down from a so-called high of 9.5% in 2014. An artificially inflated figure because we were counting the millions of tons of plastic we sent to China as recycled, even though much of it actually wasn't. It's not just the US. Plastic recycling rates, that's the green bar all the way over on the right, are lackluster the world over. Globally, only 9% of plastic waste is recycled, while 22%, the orange bar, is mismanaged. This catchier graphic rounds up to 10%. Much of that mismanaged plastic goes into the oceans. This figure is conservative and based on old data, but even 11 billion pounds a year works out to a garbage truck's worth of plastic every minute for an entire year. In 2016, a study projected that at that rate, business as usual, by 2025, just next year, there'd be 1 pound of plastics for every 3 pounds of fish in the sea. We are turning the ocean into an unpermitted landfill, which is profoundly affecting the more than 3 billion people in coastal areas who depend on the sea for their livelihood. This boy now turns to the sea not for fish, but for plastic, which he's collecting to sell. And of course, all this plastic is not good for sea creatures, which become entangled in or ingest plastic. 5 trillion plastic bags are used worldwide every year, more than 1 million a minute. That's why they're everywhere. Oceanographers have even spotted them in the Mariana Trench, the deepest spot on Earth. As for rigid ocean plastic, the shearwaters off Australia aren't the only bird species that's affected. The Lausanne albatross has an amazing natural history. Soaring for vast distances on their 6-foot wingspan, They spend much of their life at sea. They go for years without ever touching land. They live on fish, squid, and other seafood, which they catch by skimming the surface of the water with their beaks as they fly. They don't breed until they're 8 or 9 years old, laying at most 1 egg a year, which hatches into a fluffy chick. But as the parents forage for their young, they inevitably scoop up floating plastic, which they then feed to their nestlings. Although the adults can regurgitate the plastic, the chicks cannot. An estimated 5 tons of plastic are fed each year to albatross chicks on Midway Island in the Pacific. This is the result. The first time I saw this photo, I didn't want it to be true, so I dismissed it as fake. I figured someone had found a dead albatross and put all that plastic in there to make a point. But no, the atoll is covered with albatross remains with brightly colored plastic in their abdomens. Bottle caps, cigarette lighters, ballpoint pens, and other detritus of modern civilization. Altogether, more than 1,400 different species have been found to be negatively impacted by plastic waste. And this starving wolf was freed, by the way. But back to ocean plastic, which doesn't remain intact. It becomes brittle in sunlight and is abraded by wave action. While plastic doesn't break down, it does break up into ever smaller fragments. Microplastics are defined as any piece of plastic that's 5 millimeters, the size of a pencil eraser, or less. When they get down to the microscopic level, they're classified as nanoplastics. Oops, got a little ahead myself. You may have seen headlines like these last March. Researchers now estimate that there are more than 170 trillion bits of plastic in the oceans, describing it as a plastic smog. Of course, tiny fragments of plastic aren't just in the ocean. Virtually any time we use anything that's made of or incorporates plastic, it sheds microplastics. And these fragments get around. Wherever researchers look, they find them. They've been found near the peak of Mount Everest. They've been found in the air, water, soil, and rainwater. A research team at Utah State University measured the amount of plastic particles transported by wind and rain to national parks and wilderness areas in the Western United States. They estimate that these isolated places receive more than 1,000 metric tons of microplastics a year. That's equivalent to 300 million water bottles falling on just 6% of the country's land mass. They've been found in snowflakes. This purple fiber could have come from the fleece pullover I've had for more than 30 years. I stopped wearing it once I saw this snowflake photo. Microplastics can get taken up by plants. Here's one in the root of a wheat plant. This photo of a microplastic covered insect was taken by a couple hiking in the Adirondacks. Just walking across a carpet or sitting on a couch creates a little cloud of microplastics that get into the air and into house dust. Simply wearing clothes made of plastic fabrics releases plastic microfibers. So does driving a car. The friction of the tires on the pavement creates tiny tire wear particles, 3 billion pounds worth every year in the US alone. Meanwhile, in the ocean, ships slough off the marine equivalent of tire dust, leaving a trail of microplastics in their wakes. Microplastics are in the food chain and inside us. We don't just eat microplastics, we drink them too. They're in our water, bottled as more than tap. You may have seen headlines like this a few weeks ago. Researchers recently developed a new technique for identifying nanoplastics. These are particles a tiny fraction of the size of a speck of dust, so just figuring out how to find them is a challenge. they tested 3 popular brands of bottled water and found an average of nearly 250,000 microscopic fragments of plastic per liter, between 10 and 100 times higher than previously estimated. Not surprisingly, memes involving the food pyramid in USDA's My Plate had been making the rounds on social media. If you can't beat it, make fun of it. And since microplastics are in the air, we inhale them too. Plastic fragments created through wear and tear are considered secondary microplastics. Primary microplastics are plastics that were initially made small, like the microbeads we used to put in personal care products in this country. Glitter is another example. Here's a third. Remember these tiny beads of plastic resin? In the industry, they're called nurdles. That's Nurdles. Because they're so tiny, they're prone to spilling whenever they're moved. And when they do, it makes a big mess. In May of 2021, a container ship, the Express Pearl, caught fire off the coast of Colombo, Sri Lanka. It burned for 2 weeks and finally sank as it was towed out to sea. The worst environmental damage came not from heavy fuel oil or the hazardous chemicals on board, but from 87 shipping containers filled with nearly 1,800 tons of nurdles. It was the largest plastic spill the world has seen to date. Sri Lanka had launched a massive cleanup effort. It was a Sisyphean task. Shorelines were covered with nurdles up to 6.5 feet deep. And thanks to plastic's strong carbon backbone, those nurdles will continue to circulate in ocean currents for decades to come, releasing their toxic payload wherever they go, including inside the fish, seabirds, turtles, and other wildlife unfortunate enough to mistake these tiny pellets for food. They look like fish eggs, and as with all plastic debris, they attract zooplankton to their surface and come to smell like food too. Those that aren't consumed by animals will, over time, fragment into nanoplastics and be ingested by plankton, the base of the entire marine food chain. Because they are derived from fossil fuels, as microplastics break down into ever smaller particles, they continually release greenhouse gases and may well be a significant source of, and largely overlooked source, of planet warming emissions. These tiny plastic shards also continually release the chemical additives of which they're made. Microplastics are tiny Trojan horses carrying their burden of toxic chemicals wherever they go, all around the world, including inside us. Researchers have found microplastics everywhere they've looked in the human body, including our lungs, blood, breast milk, placental tissue, and in babies' first poops. So, what can we do about all this? First of all, don't feel guilty. This is not your fault. We weren't sitting around in boardrooms making decisions in the 1950s and 1960s. We inherited this situation. We didn't create it. But just in case anyone is feeling overwhelmed and despairing right about now, here's a little PSA for the Suicide and Crisis Hotline. Freud famously said, depression is anger turned inward. So let's harness that anger and put it to work fighting the plastics crisis. As folk singer and activist Joan Baez said, antidote, the action is the despair. Action is the antidote to despair. There. And since a staggering 42% of plastic produced today goes to make packaging, that's where we need to zero in. But considering how integral fracking is to its production, we really should call it frackaging. The majority of plastics produced today are designed to be used only briefly before being discarded. Most virgin plastic now goes into making containers, cups, frackaging, plastic bags, bottles, straws, forks, plates, gift cards, vapes, e-cigarettes, and even cigarette butts. Cigarette filters look like they should be biodegradable, but they're actually made from cellulose acetate, a type of plastic. Smokers flick 4 trillion butts to the ground every year, making cigarette filters the single most abundant litter item found anywhere in the world. And they leach nicotine, toxic chemicals, and heavy metals into the environment and the critters that unknowingly eat them. This black skimmer is feeding one to her chick. While we can't fix this problem overnight, we can start to make it better by not making it any worse. So rather than trying to manage an ever increasing amount of toxic plastic waste, we need to find upstream solutions and stop making so much plastic in the first place. And since 42% of the plastic produced today goes to make single-use packaging, that's where we should home in. It won't be easy. The industry struck gold when they got us addicted to disposable plastic, and they struck gold again when they convinced us that recycling was a viable way to manage plastic waste. That means we need to tackle this not just through our personal choices, but through policy change. I'm a big fan of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act that's been introduced at the federal level. But realistically speaking, in this dysfunctional Congress, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. We have a much better chance of affecting change at the local level. Last summer, New York City's Skip the Stuff law went into effect. The law prohibits restaurants from providing single-use plastics, utensils, condiment packets, napkins, extra containers, in takeout orders unless specifically requested by the customer. You can channel your energy into getting a similar bill passed in your community. Check out the free toolkit on the Beyond Plastics website under ACT. And in New York State, we're working to pass the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. I'm really excited about this bill, which would create environmental standards for packaging. I won't go into all the details, but this bill would require a 50% reduction in single-use packaging in New York State over 12 years and prohibit certain materials and chemicals, including known carcinogens, neurotoxins, and endocrine disruptors from being used in packaging. Why it is not a criminal act to put these substances in food contact materials is beyond me. The bill would also establish a process for expanding that list of toxins. And it prevents so-called advanced recycling, which really just amounts to burning plastic, from counting as recycling. Lobbyists hired by the petrochemical industry have been working to get this sketchy technology categorized as recycling, and they've succeeded in 24 states. You can download this in-depth report from the Beyond Plastics website. This packaging reduction bill is based on an excellent concept with an awful name, extended producer responsibility, EPR for short. In a nutshell, EPR makes producers legally and financially responsible for mitigating the environmental impacts of their products and packaging. You can find this checklist of 10 requirements for effective packaging reduction policies on the Beyond Plastics website. Click on Learn, then Legislation. An essential companion to any packaging reduction bill is a container deposit return law. Only 10 states currently have a bottle bill, and the one we have in New York is desperately in need of an overhaul. The deposit amount hasn't changed in over 40 years. And aside from water, the law doesn't cover non-carbonated beverages like iced tea, juice, and sports drinks. So it needs to be modernized. More exciting news from New York. Last November, our Attorney General, Letitia James, filed a groundbreaking lawsuit against PepsiCo for harming the public and the environment with its single-use packaging. Waste collection studies identified PepsiCo packaging as by far the most common single-use plastic trash found along the Buffalo River. To learn how your own state can go and do likewise, attend this free webinar hosted by Beyond Plastics in a few weeks. And Beyond Plastics has developed a whole set of easy to implement grassroots actions you can take in your own community. Stay informed by signing up to receive emails from Beyond Plastics. I encourage you to consider enrolling in Judith's excellent 7-week online class, Beyond Plastic Pollution. It's offered out of Bennington College and is open to anyone of high school age and up. I've taken it twice. And to really make a difference, join Beyond Plastics local groups and affiliates program. There are more than 100 groups nationwide working to make an impact. Join one or start your own. So now the only question is, are you in? Thank you very much. Here's how you can reach me.
Thank you, Rebekah. We've got some clapping hands in the chat. We got a note from someone saying like, this is really hard to watch, and it really is. Because it is worse than we think. I think your subtitle is very, very accurate. But I think it's really important for us to know all of this information, particularly if we're going to be advocating to local or state level or even national lawmakers, right? To know all these things. We had several questions. I actually have a few questions of my own, but I also want to make a couple of I don't know, comments, because there were some things regarding Missouri in the chat in the Q&A, and it is tough. Fellow Missourians, when I work with folks at Beyond Plastics, a lot of them live in states that are more they have more science-based laws and regulations than we have here in Missouri. And so it's sometimes amusing and sometimes distressing to hear about what's going on in other states. But tonight I don't know if y'all can see this, I don't think you can. There were 188 people on this webinar. There's still more than 180 on here right now. So, and we saw from the chat that most of those folks are in Missouri. So there's a lot of people that care about this issue. And there's a lot of work that we can do. And we, Missouri River Bird Observatory and Missouri Stream Teams United, are working on this together to do things like hopefully grow Beyond Plastics, local groups and affiliates, to organize people, to talk to people at our state house. Yes, someone asked if there is a plastic bag preemption law in Missouri. That is true. We currently municipalities cannot choose to ban or place fees on plastic bags. We're working to change that, and we can use all the help we can get. So Brenda asked, given Missouri politics, would a bill like the New York plastic reduction bill even have a chance in Missouri? We are behind New York State, there's no question about it, but the more of us that know these things, the more we can do stuff about it. So there's my Missouri PSA. Back to questions for you, Rebekah. There was a lot of chatter recently on the Beyond Plastics listserv about the linings in what we all think of as aluminum cans. And I remember it from one of your slides towards the beginning. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. It's really god awful. Just last week, I learned about this study that just came out. Researchers in Australia compared, they looked at 162 brands or containers, and for some of them, they were able to do like to like. So let's say Coke in an aluminum can, or Coke in a plastic bottle, maybe even Coke in a glass bottle. And they found the highest level of bisphenols way higher in the aluminum can than in the plastic bottle. It just is blowing people away. And there's a little video, which if I were more daring, I would put into my presentation, but you guys can find it on Google. Just Google aluminum can drain cleaner. And you can find a video that is 1.5 minutes long. And it demonstrates that if you sand the surface of an aluminum can and suspend it in drain cleaner for an hour, the can itself dissolves and you are left with your Coke hanging from the flip top lid. It's just crazy. So
Because they have liners in the cans,
yeah,
right? Basically, is
exactly.
that right?
Yeah. What I gather is they spray the metal before forming the cans. Obviously, they don't go in sticking a liner in each can. So it varies what the liner is. It can be epoxy resin. It can be, is it polyethylene? I forget. I looked at it 2 days ago. Why should I remember? But there's plastic in some form inside aluminum cans, and of course inside tin cans, so-called tin cans, steel cans, which most of us have known about for a long time. I
I have
thought
to
most of
say
us
I
had known
didn't.
about that for a long time.
I didn't know about that, the lining in steel cans either.
Oh boy.
So yes, this new study was particularly surprising to me.
Yeah, it's to prevent corrosion. It's and to from the contents getting an off taste. Who wants metallic tasting tomatoes? Think about how acidic
Mhm.
tomatoes are. Boy, they need a can.
Wow.
Yeah, a liner rather.
Let's see. Eth, you're seeing some questions as well. I'm going back up a lot, kind of came in. Did people in plastic manufacturing in the 50s not think about this as a potential problem, or was the major concern just that of dollars and profit right then, rather than possible problems in the future?
I think it's a safe bet. They didn't think about it, and regulations, bad as they are today, were even less present then. So that's part of the reason I put in the war slides at the beginning. It was a war effort. They were just trying to do this job. They were trying to win the war, and they weren't thinking about, hey, what might these chemicals do to us, do to the world? That was just not on anyone's radar. Um, I there may be some exceptions to that, like plastics that were made earlier, and maybe people raised concerns. I mean, the scientists who made them may have raised concerns, but in general, it just, in effect, the material has been grandfathered in.
I believe folks can see the Q&A, but we have a couple comments in there from, I hope so. We have a couple comments in there from Kathy Michaels, discussing plastic synthetic turf. So the turf that lines some of our sports fields, from professional, but all the way down to like kindergarten and daycare fields, is very, very toxic. So I'm going to try and actually cut and paste from the Q&A and make sure that these are in the chat as well. Can you see some of the stuff,
I can.
Rebecca, as well? Okay,
Yeah,
good
yeah.
deal.
So the question about 114 moons, that's mass, that is weight. So if the moon were on the Earth where we could weigh it, because obviously we can't out in space, it raises something different then. But brought to Earth, moon weight, 114 moons, that's how much, that's the weight of the plastic we have made.
All
It's a
time.
weight versus mass situation, because there's no gravity on the moon. So
Yeah, right,
that's,
exactly.
I'm done trying to speak physics now. Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand like the difference between whatever however we compute that mass as weight, like what that conversion is like.
Hey,
I also
I can
yeah,
go get my book.
yeah, and also like I was trying to think of it in surface area too. Like if we had 1 inch thick, how much surface would it cover? And I think I computed about 8 times it would cover the moon at an inch thick.
Yeah, wow. Okay. Now here's a question. Why can't we send all the plastic into the sun? I once had a boyfriend who suggested that for nuclear waste. Obviously, it would be expensive. I mean, that would be a very expensive disposal method. And of course, would we stop making plastic at that point once we send all the plastic to the sun? And then how are we going to catch the plastic that's already loose in the environment? So it doesn't seem like a very pragmatic approach. Oops, I'm scrolling too fast.
I also feel like
Yeah.
it's something that we would have some consequences that we'd later be like, oh, that was not good. I don't
When one
know.
blows up on the launch pad.
Yeah, I think it's another matter of physics. Like, how much energy would it take to put that much mass out there? Like, I think it's tough enough with the restrictions that we have trying to do the little bit of space travel we do.
Synthetic hair. Oh my God, yes, I know. Terrible, terrible stuff. And I'm in theater, and sometimes I have to wear wigs. And there was one rehearsal where I just went like this because the hair was all tangled, and out came several. And what do I do with this? Can I stick it in my pocket?
Wow.
How am I going to control these hairs? Yeah, terrible stuff. Reductions, more cleanup possibly where things are with bacteria that eat and process plastics. Not much of anywhere, and there's probably not enough room on the earth for all the bacteria that would be needed to eat all the plastic that's already out there. We're looking for fixes, we're hoping for fixes, and unless something radically changes, seems like a pipe dream. We just need to stop production. Microplastic. Farmed or wild caught fish. And what about sea salt? Oh God. I hadn't even thought about sea salt.
These are a lot of good questions here.
Yeah, really. I have read about farm versus wild caught fish, and I forget the answer. I'm vegan, so it's not an issue for me. I think farmed is still considered better. But again, it's hard to detect nanoplastics because they're so small and they're just figuring out the technology for that. So for example, in that recent experiment that I mentioned, they only looked for 7 kinds of plastics. It's not like they were able to find all the nanoplastics in the water and say, oh, this is polypropylene and this is PET. They just looked for the chemical signatures of each of the basic 7 plastics, the single-use packaging plastics. So there may have been others that weren't identified. Are aluminum water also? Yep, aluminum water bottles. Oh, do you mean reusable? I don't.
Aluminum water bottles. I'm guessing that question is the rare but more forthcoming they're single use kind of here.
Yeah.
Actually, I have one.
Yeah, I've seen
that I
some.
was given. We were given this at a hotel in Kansas City, and so would these not of this one, right? Of this one,
Right.
that you would
Okay,
purchase
yeah.
for like a couple dollars.
Right. Yeah, no, it's nothing magic about the can. It is the fact of metal. Anything that's metal that's touching food or drink is going to be lined. That's sold that way. Okay, Kathleen is interested. Kathy is interested in the chat later.
Okay. Yep. I actually, yeah, there is some good stuff going in the chat. Y'all are great. Like I don't, Ethan and Rebecca, I don't know about you, but I'm barely not keeping up with everything. I'm throwing a comment from the Q&A into the chat, just with the caveat that, I mean, I thought, Rebecca, one of the first things you said when you said, what are we going to do about all this? And you told people this is not your fault. So I feel like we're always like, we're kind of hesitant to be like, okay, as a consumer, like, here are some good things you can do. I do think individual actions are important, right? But we need to change the system. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
with that all in mind, I'm still putting this comment in the chat because it refers to just working with restaurants and trying as a consumer to get in restaurants to change their small systems.
Okay, Brenda talks about this all seeming so overwhelming. What can we do other than avoid using plastic whenever possible? Yeah, it is overwhelming, and I apologize for that. And that is why I put in the 988 hotline, because believe me, I mean, there are days when I think I feel so awful about what all I'm contributing in my own life that I think world would be better off without me. So it was when I learned about the tire wear particles that I realized, oh, there's only so much I can actively do. I can't stop driving. So in a way, I've become kind of inured like a doctor. And it just, I can separate it to some degree and realize, you know, this is a problem and we have to work on it. Lynn, I faithfully recycle. Everything we label as recycle. Is it just better than, yes, it is better to just recycle numbers 1 and 2 and throw the rest away. And I actually know people who don't even recycle numbers 1 and 2 because of the issue of there being more toxic chemicals in things made out of recycled materials. Recycled plastics. We're talking about plastics here. Everything else is fine to recycle. But so for example, if you think about the benches that they make out of plastic bags or bottle caps, you know, you're so torn because you want to give things new life, put it to good use, and yet if you're just creating something else that's going to pollute itself and create microplastics and nanoplastics, unfortunately, at this point, landfill is the least bad option, and it's a bad option.
I think that sometimes people, out of the goodness of their hearts, want to recycle so bad, they'll take whatever's, maybe this will work. So we call it wish cycling.
Exactly. Yep. I've been there.
It's not going to work.
It's still hard to not be there, honestly, because you're like, well, maybe this time, you know.
Yeah.
Can I highlight something that Mary Culler, who's executive director of Missouri Stream Teams United, she put in the chat? This bill has been filed in Missouri to repeal the prohibition on local political subdivisions to regulate plastic bags. So KC area Representative Ingrid Burnett has once again filed this bill to take away that law that we have that does not allow any municipality or county or whatever to choose, if their voters so choose, to ban plastic bags. We can't do that right here in Missouri. So Representative Burnett has once again filed a bill to repeal that, and we like that. We want that to happen. A wonderful thing that you can do that Ethan and I, and I'm sure Mary, have been trying to do is get Representative Burnett some support and maybe even a co-sponsor from the majority party in our state house so that the bill gets a hearing and we might have a chance of passing it. So yes, a good one.
Good bipartisan support would be the key to that. And one good conservative statement that we learned from one of our mentors is that that legislation that was previously passed is an unfunded mandate. They're asking municipalities to foot the bill for something that they did not support financially.
Okay, question in the chat. Is glass the only choice for drinks? What about silicone? Silicone is made with the same chemicals as plastics are, those same toxic chemicals. I looked into this once, so I avoid it as well. Okay, calculations on the garbage to sun plans, interesting. Does BPA free can mean nothing? Yes, it means nothing because there are regrettable substitutions. So other bisphenols, which haven't been studied as much, but are in the same family, same class of chemicals and just as endocrine disrupting. And even companies that say they're BPA free, some of them have been found to, I mean, I think in that study I just mentioned earlier, they found that some of the items they tested, the beverages they tested claimed to be BPA free, and yet they actually found BPA. So maybe the can is BPA free, but there's all the food contact materials that your beverage comes into contact with before it even gets into the can. So plastic tubing, etc. Okay. I keep scrolling and I keep seeing different stuff come in.
Sorry, Rebecca. And at the same time, Ethan and I are like trying to put away ones that you've answered.
Okay. Oh, I see. Thank you. Okay, Don, my friend Don Hamilton, what is the most common way microplastics getting airborne? Wind is a huge part of it. There was an article a few weeks ago about a hurricane that started over the Atlantic, and researchers up in Nova Scotia got their instruments ready because they looked at the path, and they found that when the hurricane got up to Nova Scotia, it rained down microplastics. This hurricane had been nowhere but over the ocean, so that's where it sucked the microplastics up from. So what I would imagine it's wind is what gets it airborne. Primarily, I mean that's got to be the most. Caroline, yes, we have to work against fossil fuels, no question. Oh, Cheryl carries. I'm sorry to be squinting. I need stronger glasses.
Is it just a fossil fuel, or is it more? Is it petrochemical?
Yes. Yeah.
All of the above, which makes it really easy, of course, because they're industries with not very much power, and we can easily get what's good for the people instead of what's good for petrochemical profits. No problem. But yes, Caroline, absolutely.
And Kathy's putting in a pitch to protect the kids and the environment from plastic synthetic turf. Yep, that is huge, 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 horrible issue. It's really appalling to think about what all is leaching from the syn turf.
I'm putting that one in the chat as well. I'm putting a lot of these things that are more like comments into the chat, so that as Kathy also suggested, we can save the chat and we can send it to folks with a follow-up.
Okay, Steve Olson has asked, what is the best way, in your opinion, to get people to use less plastic, thus reducing production by reducing demand? Great question. And the gold standard is considered reuse and refill. So you bring your own container, it gets filled, you bring it back again. It seems unlikely plastic use can be sufficiently reduced by legislation to make a much difference. Steve, this the New York bill, which has been co-sponsored by 74 assembly members, we already have a majority in the Senate. It's been co-sponsored by 74 assembly members. We just need 2 more to have a majority. It could pass, and it would call for that 50% reduction in packaging over 12 years, which is feasible, but aggressive. And if this bill passes, it will be a great model for other states to follow. 4 other states already do have packaging reduction laws in effect, but they've got loopholes. So we've had time to learn from their mistakes.
Along those lines, I'm a big fan of models. So do you see any European models or any place else in the world that might have a model that we could look up to from the States as more of an ideal?
I have heard that France is doing great things about eliminating plastic packaging. But at this point, I don't, that's all I can say. I've seen a couple of articles about it, and it sounds great. How effective it actually is, time will tell. Rubber mulch and rubberized padding in areas on playgrounds. I'm sorry, folks. It's gonna leach chemicals into the soil and it's gonna get into the water. Hate to break it to you, but
Yeah,
yeah, playgrounds.
we're full of bad news this evening. We are.
Oh, okay, Kathy weighs in.
Cool. She's the expert here on turf.
That's for sure.
If someone wanted to provide a foundation for awareness and minimizing use at a community or neighborhood level, could you share some insight on the best way to forge that path?
The Beyond Plastics website has got a lot of great resources for that. And I really recommend that you check it out.
Yep. If I'm not mistaken, Rebekah, it has, I'm like, we have, I mean, we're affiliates. There are template town level ordinances and things of that nature, I believe, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
There's a trifecta: getting rid of balloons, plastic bags, and what's the other one? Plastic straws.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's a campaign they launched last year before, to get dry cleaners to not put dry cleaning in the plastic bags that they use. Another project they've got going is to persuade Meals on Wheels. If you think about Meals on Wheels, that's all coming in single-use plastic right now. They're trying to get reusables into place. The reusables are made of number 5 polypropylene plastic, which is by far the least bad plastic, leaches the least in fact, it does not have endocrine disruptors. That is the plastic that they can use in laboratories. Still plastic, but better than all the single-use stuff.
Also, at the neighborhood, like local level, especially for folks that, don't want to go be advocates in a town council or state level setting. But that's why I liked that comment about talking with your local restaurants, because I think if, enough people, and it's probably not really that many people that it would take as their customers to be like, hey, we really don't like that you're using this packaging or that you're putting out straws or whatever, to make a difference. And okay, if it's one restaurant, that's still a lot more than your own household. So it's an impact.
And that's a great point, that multiple people should do it. Beyond Plastics 2 years ago came out with a guide on getting restaurants to reduce their use of plastic. And here I was thinking of going to restaurants by all by myself. Why will they pay attention to me? But yeah, if you make it a campaign, multiple people, then that could make a difference.
I've certainly muscled through quite a few of these questions here. That's pretty impressive to get through like 26 questions there. And we're going to have quite a bit of work working through the chat here afterwards, see if we can help with some follow-up information as well. And those of you that join late, yes, we will be posting this to YouTube, so you be sure to catch it there.
I'm muted. Lots of great suggestions in the chat here.
Yeah.
Links and all kinds of info.
Terrific. Wooden wheels and paper cups. Well, actually, paper cups, but wooden wheels, yeah, that'll make for bumpy rides.
All we can do is our best. Do our best each day,
and share info with other people.
Yep. Sharing information,
like just family and friends and relatives.
Yeah. Just let them know. People can make their decisions.
All right, I guess I'm not seeing any more questions, folks. I'm sorry if we missed anything. There was a lot of chat and Q&A traffic there for a little while. But we'll be following up with some info. And Rebekah, thank you so very much.
You're very welcome.
All
Thank
right,
you guys. It's been a great group.
catch everyone later.
Bye.